Chapter 20 of The Trail of the Lonesome Pine. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mike Venditti, MikeVenditti.com. The Trail of the Lonesome Pine by John Fox, Jr. Chapter 20. The boom started after its shadow through the hills now, and Hale watched it sweep toward him with grim satisfaction at the fulfillment of his own prophecy, and with disgust that by the irony of fate it should come from the very quarters where years before he had played the maddening part of lunatic at large. The avalanche was sweeping southward. Pennsylvania was creeping down the Alleghanies. Emissaries of New York capital were pouring into the hills. The tidewater of Virginia and the bluegrass region of Kentucky were sending in their best blood and youth, and friends of the helmeted Englishman were hurrying over the seas. Eastern companies were taking up principalities, and at Cumberland Gap those helmeted Englishmen had acquired a kingdom. They were building a town there, too, with huge steel plants, broad avenues, and business blocks that would have graced Broadway, and they were pouring out $1,000,000 for every $1,000 that it would have cost Hale to acquire the land on which the work was going on. Moreover, they were doing it there, as Hale heard, because they were too late to get control of his Gap through the Cumberland. At his Gap, too, the same movement was starting. In stage and wagon, on mule and horse, riding and trying, sometimes and even afoot, came the rush of madmen. Horses and mules were drowned in the mud holes along the road. Such was the traffic, and such were the floods. The incomers slept 8 in a room, burned oil at $1 a gallon, and ate potatoes at 10 cents apiece. The Grand Central Hotel was a humming real estate exchange, and night and day the occupants of any room could hear through their thin partitions, lots booming to right, left, behind, and in front of them. The labor and capital question was instantly solved, for everybody became a capitalist: carpenter, bricklayer, blacksmith, singing teacher, and preacher. There is no difference between the shrewdest business man and a fool in a boom, for the boom levels all grades of intelligence and produces as distinct a form of insanity as you can find within the walls of an asylum. Lots took wings skyward. Hale bought one for June for $30 and sold it for $1,000. Before the autumn was gone he found himself on the way to ridiculous opulence, and when spring came he had the world in a sling, and if he wished he could toss it playfully at the sun and have it drop back into his hand again. And the boom spread down the valley and into the hills. The police guard had little to do, and over in the mountains the feud miraculously came to a sudden close. So pervasive, indeed, was the spirit of the times that the Honorable Sam Budd actually got old Buck Falin and old Dave Tolliver to sign a truce, agreeing to a complete cessation of hostilities until he carried through a land deal in which both were interested. And after that was concluded, nobody had time, even the Red Fox, for devilry and private vengeance. So busy was everybody picking up the manna which was dropping straight from the clouds. Hale bought all of old Judd's land, formed a stock company, and in the trade gave June a bonus of the stock. Money was plentiful as grains of sand, and the cashier at the bank in the back of the furniture store at the Gap chuckled to his beardless directors as he locked the wooden door on the day before the great land sale. Capital stock paid in $13,000, deposits $300,000. Loans $260,000, interest from 8 to 12%, and beardless though those directors were, that statement made them real. A club was formed, and the like of it was not below Mason and Dixon's line in the way of furniture, periodicals, liquors, and cigars. Poker ceased. It was too tame in competition with this new game of town lots. On the top of High Knob a kingdom was bought. The young bloods of the town would build a lake up there, run a road up, and build a Swiss chalet on the very top for a country club. The booming editor was discharged. A new paper was started, and the ex-editor of a New York daily was got to run it. If anybody wanted anything, he got it from no matter where, nor at what cost. Nor were the arts wholly neglected. One man, who was proud of his voice, thought he would like to take singing lessons. An emissary was sent to Boston to bring back the best teacher he could find. The teacher came with a method of placing the voice by trying to say "come," at the base of the nose and between the eyes. This was with the lips closed. He charged $2 per half hour for his effort, as he had each pupil say it twice for half an hour each day, and for 6 weeks the town was humming like a beehive. At the end of that period the teacher fell ill and went his way with a fat pocketbook, and not a warbling soul had got the chance to open his mouth. The experience dampened nobody. Generosity was limitless. It was equally easy to raise money for a roulette wheel, a cathedral, or an expedition to Africa. And even yet the railroad was miles away, and even yet in February the improvement company had a great land sale. The day before it, competing purchasers had deposited checks aggregating 3 times the sum asked for by the company for the land, so the buyers spent the night organizing a pool to keep down competition, and drawing lots for the privilege of bidding. For fairness, the sale was an auction, and one old farmer who had sold some of the land originally for $100 an acre bought back some of that land for $1,000 a lot. That sale was the climax, and that early. Hale got a warning word from England, but he paid no heed, even though after the sale the boom slackened, poised, and stayed still. For optimism was unquenchable, and another tide would come with another sale in May, and so the spring passed in the same joyous recklessness and same perfect hope. In April the first railroad reached the Gap at last, and families came in rapidly. Money was still plentiful, and right royally was it spent, for was not just as much more coming when the second road arrived in May? Life was easier, too. Supplies came from New York. 8 o'clock dinners were in vogue, and everybody was happy. Every man had 2 or 3 good horses and nothing to do. The place was full of visiting girls. They rode in parties to High Knob, and the ring of hoof and the laughter of youth made every dusk resonant with joy. On Popular Hill houses sprang up like magic, and weddings came. The passing stranger was stunned to find out in the wilderness such a spot. Gaiety, prodigal hospitality, a police force of gentlemen, nearly all of whom were college graduates, and a club where poker flourished in the smoke of Havana cigars, and a barrel of whiskey stood in one corner with a faucet waiting for the turn of any hand. And still the foundation of the new hotel was not started, and the coming of the new railroad did not make a marked change. For some reason the May sale was postponed by the improvement company, but what did it matter? Perhaps it was better to wait for the fall, and so the summer went on unchanged. Every man still had a bank account, and in the autumn the boom would come again. At such a time June came home for her vacation, and Bob Berkley came back from college for his. All through the school year Hale had got the best reports of June. His sister's letters were steadily encouraging. June had been very homesick for the mountains and for Hale at first, but the homesickness had quickly worn off, apparently for both. She had studied hard, had become a favorite among the girls, and had held her own among them in a surprising way. But it was on June's musical talent that Hale's sister always laid most stress, and on her voice, which she said was really unusual. June wrote, too, at longer and longer intervals, and in her letters Hale could see the progress she was making, the change in her handwriting, the increasing formality of expression, and the increasing shrewdness of her comments on her fellow pupils, her teachers, and the life about her. She did not write home for a reason Hale knew, though June never mentioned it, because there was no one at home who could read her letters. But she always sent messages to her father and Bub, and to the old miller and old Hon, and Hale faithfully delivered them when he could. From her people, as Hale learned from his sister, only one messenger had come during the year to June, and he came but once. One morning a tall, black-haired, uncouth young man in a slouch hat and a Prince Albert coat had strode up to the school with a big paper box under his arm and asked for June. As he handed the box to the maid at the door, it broke and red apples burst from it and rolled down the steps. There was a shriek of laughter from the girls, and the young man, flushing red as the apples, turned without giving his name and strode back with no little majesty, looking neither to right nor left. Hale knew, and June knew, that the visitor was her cousin Dave, but he never mentioned the incident to him, though as the end of the session drew nigh her letters became more frequent and more full of messages to the people of Lonesome Cove, and she seemed eager to get back home.